You know that feeling?
Yeah.
When like a story, it just grabs you, but it's a little too close to home. Like maybe, just maybe, great-great-grandpa wasn't totally off his rocker with that tale he used to tell.
Right.
That's kind of where we're diving today, actually, with Hexendorf. We're talking about those family legends, the ones about like a disappearing village.
Yeah, and what's so interesting to me about this one, about Hexendorf, is how it blends those very specific family ties with this universal thing that I think we all kind of share, this fascination with lost places, with hidden histories. It's almost like the story's whispering to us, what if you're past? What if it holds these secrets that you haven't uncovered yet?
Oh, for sure. And what's really compelling, I think, about how Hexendorf starts is our main character, Bill, right? He inherits this legend. And it's about this village that vanishes in Austria every year, always in April. I mean, sounds pretty far-fetched, right?
Yeah.
Well, Bill thinks so too.
And that skepticism, I think, is so crucial because it lets us, I don't know, I think it lets us kind of access the story alongside him. It's not like we're dealing with, like, some gullible kid, right? It's someone who loves a good mystery, but needs proof, just like you listening, wanting this deep dive to sort of separate fact from folklore.
Exactly. It's that prove-it attitude. That's what makes this whole journey so relatable. But here's the thing. This legend, it's rooted in these strangely specific details. Like, we're not talking about vague stories about once upon a time, right? It's Austria. It's April. And it's tied to Bill's actual ancestors.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, right?
It does. It absolutely does. Because it's those concrete details that really ground the narrative. Even if we're skeptical right from the start, that specificity, it sticks with you. It makes you think, oh, if there were such a place.
Totally. And Bill, he's a man of the 21st century, right? So he doesn't just like dust off some old map. And he's got his new wife, Sophie, with him. And they're all about using technology.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So Google Maps becomes their modern day treasure map, which I love.
I love that. It's so fascinating, isn't it? How even these like ancient stories are now being sort of viewed through this digital lens. Makes you wonder, does that change how we experience them? Like, is it easier to believe or maybe harder to believe in something magical when you can just pull up like a satellite image?
Right. It's like this collision of two worlds. So imagine this. Bill and Sophie, armed with their Google Maps printout, right?
Yeah.
They're winding through these Austrian back roads. And just when they're about to give up, they find it. This old dirt road leads to this cluster of buildings, and it looks straight out of like a grim fairy tale. Only like way less charming.
See, and this is where I think the author's use of sensory details is so effective, because he doesn't just tell us that Hexendorf is unsettling, right? He puts us right there. Those crumbling buildings, the way that the villagers are watching Bill and Sophie, it's subtle, but it's menacing.
Oh, totally. Like you're stepping into a nightmare that you didn't even know you had.
Right.
And right there, above what looks like the village inn, there's this faded sign. Gasthof. Hexendorf. Talk about an invitation you can't refuse.
Oh.
Even if, maybe, you really should.
It's like one of those dreams, where you get that feeling like something's off that you just can't put your finger on it.
Right. You just want to like warn them, get out.
Exactly.
But of course, they're already heading to the Gasthof.
Of course.
And like any good mystery, it's that whole we should really just turn back thing that keeps you hooked.
Right.
So inside, they meet Perchta, the innkeeper.
Yeah.
She's beautiful, charming. And if you know your folklore, that's when you know those alarm bells should be going off.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Perchta's character, she's drawing on this really long history of, these dangerous women in storytelling. She's like a siren or a succubus, or even like one of those fairies that might lure you off the path,
Right.
What is it about these figures, I wonder, especially in these stories that are supposed to be warnings to us, that use beauty as this kind of trap?
It's so interesting, isn't it? Like we're almost hardwired to be drawn to that.
Right.
But also kind of wary of it at the same time, this powerful femininity. And in the story, Perchta really zeroes in on Bill, like making sure that his beer glass is never empty.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know, that just adds another layer to that whole archetype, don't you think?
It totally does, because it plays on these deeper anxieties I think we all have about influence, about losing control. Like, Bill's having a great time.
Right.
But that detail about the beer and how it just keeps getting tastier with each refill, Like, that's subtle, but that's magic at work right there. Even Sophie notices. Bill's not really acting like himself.
No, she's sharp. I'll give her that. Even with the possibly enchanted beer and these like weird tasting mushrooms, she's the one who's still grounded. But as midnight gets closer, things in the gas top, they start to get really strange.
Uh-oh.
Which, again, if you've cracked open a folklore book, midnight never means anything good in these stories.
No, it really doesn't. But it's more than just, oh, this is bad news, though, right? It's like this universal symbol, midnight, that point where one day sort of bleeds into the next. It's a time when boundaries blur, when things from other realms, they can seep into ours. Think about how many cultures have all these myths, these rituals tied to midnight.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a crack in reality or something.
It really is. And Hexendorf does not disappoint. The clock strikes 12. Perchta, she lets out this cry, Mitternacht, and suddenly the pretty innkeeper, she's gone.
Oh, no.
And in her place is, well, the story uses the word hag, but it's more than that.
Right. It's like the story's showing us the truth behind the mask, or maybe like tapping into our deepest fears about what's really lurking beneath the surface of things.
Yeah, and the villagers, they all join in, right?
Oh,
and there's this like eerie dance that starts up around this bonfire. It's primal.
Oh,
It's unsettling. Gives me chills just thinking about it. But Sophie, she snaps into action. She knows something is really wrong. And somehow she manages to escape. She gets back to that inn in Kleindorf, and she meets Frau Steiner. And Frau Steiner basically confirms everything.
Oh, wow.
And then drops some seriously creepy backstory.
Like what?
Turns out this whole disappearing village thing, it's not random. It happens every 50 years. And it's all thanks to Perchta, putting a curse on the place, back before she was, shall we say, dealt with a few centuries ago.
Wow, so it's like the story is layering these historical wrongs into the narrative. It's making Perchta more than just this monster, right?
Yeah.
She's a figure who was shaped by persecution, by this desire for revenge, which makes you wonder, is Bill just another victim in her eyes? Or is there something else going on, something more complicated?
Right. And poor Bill is still stuck back in Hexendorf, completely enthralled by Perchta. And Sophie is racing against the clock because guess what?
What?
If they're not out by sunrise,
Oh, well, no.
they're trapped forever.
Talk about pressure. The author uses that whole race against time so well. It ratchets up the stakes. But I have to say, I find it so interesting that even in this total supernatural crisis, it's Sophie's pragmatism,
Right.
It's her clear thinking that saves the day. She remembers Frau Steiner mentioning crucifixes. She grabs a couple and she rushes back into that nightmare.
Sophie going back into that village, armed with what? Crucifixes and holy water. It's like she's one of those fairy tale heroes, only, way fewer glass slippers and way more ancient curses this time around.
It's true, though. It really shows just how powerful those old folk beliefs are, don't you think? Even if we don't actually believe them consciously, there's something about those rituals, those objects. They speak to something, some primal fear.
Right.
It makes you wonder, would any of us react any differently if we were in Sophie's shoes?
Totally makes you think about that line between what we believe and what we, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What we're skeptical of.
Yeah.
And the story, this is the thing, it doesn't let up on the tension.
Yeah.
Sophie finds Bill. He's right in the middle of everything. Perch is practically glued to his side. He's totally under her spell. But then, bam, Sophie throws that crucifix right around his neck. And suddenly it's like we're reminded that even when you're dealing with what seems like ancient magic, intention, they can still have power.
Right.
Whether or not you buy into the religious symbolism, there's something about what Sophie does, out of desperation. It disrupts something, breaks the spell.
Yeah, and getting out of Hexendorf, that's a whole other story.
It's so epic.
Perchta is furious. The villagers are closing in on them. It becomes this desperate fight to just survive. And the way the author describes their escape, dodging these ghostly figures, the forest, closing in around them, man, it's just visceral.
It plays on those primal fears, that feeling of being hunted, of being lost in the place that should be familiar, but it's wrong. It's like the story itself is coming after you, too.
Right. You're right there with them.
You're right there with them, feeling that panic, and they barely make it out before the sun comes up. And just like Frau Steiner said, the village, it's gone. First rays of sunlight.
Wow.
But, and here's the kicker, right? Perchta, she gets the last word. a curse.
Oh no, that's not good. That lingering curse is so interesting though, because it makes you ask, did they really escape? Or did some part of Hexendorf of that night follow them back, back into the regular world?
Right. And what does that mean for them, for Bill and Sophie? I mean, they've gone from skeptics to believers in, what, a single night?
Right.
And now they've got this curse. How do you even come back from that?
That's the question I'll leave you with, actually. Because in a way, it's kind of like our journey too, right? Anyone who dives into these stories, you start with curiosity, maybe a little skepticism. But if the story's good, if it really, hits you in the right way, it changes something.
It makes you wonder, what would you do if you uncovered one of those family legends? Would you just brush it off? Or would it make you look at everything a little differently? The world, your own past.
Right.
I don't know. I think a little mystery keeps things interesting. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.